More than 2,000 striking healthcare workers in New Brunswick have now returned to work. Premier Blaine Higgs' government issued the order on Friday requiring them to leave the picket lines. The majority of the province's other public sector workers are going to remain on strike. Union leaders say the healthcare workers they represent are complying with the order. Any worker who fails to show up to work when they're scheduled could now face fines up to $20,000 per day. And joining us with more on this developing story is New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs. Premier Higgs, thank you so much for joining us, sir.
You're welcome.
Let's begin with the big question, sir. What happened on Friday and why did the back-to-work order come into effect?
Well, we had been meeting regularly twice a day and certainly getting reports daily on the situation within our hospitals. And the cancellations of medical procedures, or certainly in terms of our ability to handle patient load, was all boiling down to even in surgeries that we couldn't do because of the situation and the sanitary conditions at the hospitals primarily. Also screening services in the pandemic with people coming and going into the hospital. So it came to a point where we had to do something. And that was certainly a topic of discussion the night before with the CUPE leaders, that we had to have people back on Friday within the healthcare system. And it was a requirement. So it was, I certainly want to thank those that are back now in the system. We welcome them with open arms, and they've integrated back very nicely, and they've come with a very willingness to help us get back on track. So much appreciated.
Premier Higgs, some are arguing that wouldn't it have been better to have reached an agreement or moved forward with the negotiations with the union rather than forcing laborers to go back to work, even if they are in the healthcare system, which we all acknowledge is in desperate need of their labor at this time?
Well, of course it would have been better, and I would have liked to achieve that as well. It's unfortunate to be even in this situation during a pandemic when healthcare workers are being asked to leave their jobs. But in this situation, we put an offer on the table on Thursday, meeting all day, talking and dealing with the issues, and basically saying, we have an opportunity here to close this deal. We put the same offer on the table. I mean, it's basically a 3% increase a year for 5 years, so 15%, but it's broken down in a wage adjustment plus a 2% of a regular increase annually. It's a very good offer. We increase the casual pay from 80% of the rate to 100% of the rate. We want to, of the 7 locals, 2 have pensions that are unsustainable in their current format. The others are fine and in the format that works well. We just offered to let's have our actuaries look at those and map a path forward, as well as include another 2,000 or 3,000 people into a pension plan who currently don't qualify. It is a really good offer, and we were shocked really that the leadership didn't accept it. And coming back at 4 a.m. on a Friday morning and basically saying no deal and wanting more, it's like, wow, I need to know that the members actually understand what is offered here, because it is really good. When I traveled around the legislature and I walked to the legislature in that morning, I met with several folks and I asked them, what is the issue with the current deal? And I was shocked, really surprised to learn that they didn't really know the details of what had been proposed. And that's why we said, look, you need to understand what we've offered here, because it is very, very good.
Now, Premier, as you know, many within the union, particularly CUPE's leadership, would disagree with how you're describing it. In fact, CBC News Network spoke with the New Brunswick CUPE president, Stephen Dorst, earlier today, and he said that some of the workers have been without contracts for anywhere between 3 and 5 years, that the pressures faced by the healthcare system were there for years before the pandemic and not addressed by the provincial government. And he also talked to us earlier about the relationship between your government and CUPE membership, and I'd love to get your response to that. Have a listen to what he had to tell us.
When you have 10 locals representing sectors right across, every sector right across the province, that have felt they have been pushed to the edge and must take job action to try and get these contracts settled, the relationship with the Premier is not good at all. These workers feel they're being bullied, harassed, and certainly not well represented by their elected. This Premier was elected to represent all New Brunswickers, And these workers are not feeling that he's representing their interests very well.
What do you say, Premier?
Well, those are disappointing comments. Obviously, the time lapse in terms of the contracts. I mean, there are contracts that have expired and been under negotiation for a long time. I mean, my involvement got certainly heightened in the last several weeks and months. But the sticking point has always been, it's been like, I want 20% over 4 years, or we're not talking. And so that never changed. The CUPE position never changed on that until about a month ago. And then it got down to very serious discussions of what's realistic. And you know, as far as the hospital situations and the crisis in hospital care, we know there are situations there across our country. And yes, it's been manifesting for 10 or 15 years and is becoming a crisis. But you add to that a pandemic on proportions that have never been seen before in our country. And then you're trying to deal with keeping people safe and say, well, okay, what do we do with that? I can understand how through a labor dispute, maybe you'd look at other aspects of how you strike and have a legal situation to do so. That's what we value in our country. But to do it in the healthcare system that's already stressed and strained because of a pandemic, it's kind of it's surprising, really. We had to react because what we put on the table was very, very good. Premier, and to try to hold us ransom because of a pandemic was unconscionable, really.
Please forgive me, sir. I just don't want to run out of time because I do want to get your opinion on a couple of other things because you've mentioned, understandably, we're all still in the middle of this pandemic, managing our lives through this nightmare. But you have an all-party COVID-19 committee that's meant to be nonpartisan, and the goal is to help everyone. But we've got members of other parties who have left your COVID-19 committee specifically because of this decision, this emergency order, back to work order. They don't feel right with it. So it isn't just the unions. It does seem like members of the government themselves, albeit opposition members, they aren't necessarily supportive of this move either, sir.
Well, I guess you can appreciate that the opposition will oppose, you know, as a most kind of a notable position to take. However, in relation to us looking at this, you know, the question was get back to the table. We spent 9 hours working through a tentative agreement that basically the leadership were taking back to their bargaining team to accept it. And we left about 9 o'clock that night. And then at 4 a.m. the next day, and as we left, I said, I need to have healthcare workers back to work tomorrow. At 4 a.m., we find out, no, that's not acceptable. So what would we do? Would we go back in COVID cabinet and debate it more? When we have an offer that I learned that the membership really didn't have an opportunity to assess and say, well, we need to make sure that they all see this and ask all the questions they want. And I would even participate in a town hall or any activity to explain it because it is really good. So would I have spent more time in the legislature or more time with a discussion, or did we have to act? The health professionals were telling us they needed us to act, and therefore we did.
Premier, let me just conclude with one final thought, which is, you know that politics, so much of it is perception. And the perception for many in the public, of course, most people would agree they want their doctors and their nurses and medical staff there available to them, whether they've got COVID or they've got a heart attack or they're getting their flu shot. But at a time when we are celebrating the contribution of healthcare workers, some may perceive your government's action as bullying the very people who are saving our lives, and it could hurt you politically. And I wonder what argument you would present to that.
Well, I certainly would you know, agree that they have been a tremendous resource and potential to help us get through the pandemic, and have done a tremendous work throughout. That is absolutely the case, and I respect everything they've done in that regard. Equally, at this stage, we have a crisis right now because of the pandemic and the health concerns that we have to react to. That's why the offer is what it is, to recognize that we know you've done a great job, and we want to recognize that. The offer does that. And that's why I'm so confident if everyone gets a chance to look at it and understand it, they will feel the same way, because you're absolutely correct. They've been tremendous ambassadors for our province in helping us get through this pandemic, and the offer reflects that.
Premier of New Brunswick, Blaine Higgs, sir, thank you so much for making time for us.
You're very welcome.
Take care.